Just 6 games on tonight's slate for daily fantasy baseball, but I still think both for pitchers and for hitters, there is upside to be had. There are at least 4 guys, I would say, a pitcher with a decent path to 7, 8, 9 strikeouts. There are a couple stacks I feel pretty good about. So a limited slate in terms of the number of games, but still one where you can talk yourself into big games from a couple of these options. So we'll break down which players, which pitchers, hitters have that upside, which guys we should build around, and my favorite options for today in MLB DFS. Welcome on into the solo shop. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire, here to break down this 6-game main slate for Wednesday with lock set for 6:35 p.m. Eastern. So again, 6:35 p.m. Eastern is locked for today. If you are like me, a procrastinator, make sure you account for that within your schedule for tonight. Across those 6 games, only one game with temperatures under 60 degrees. That is shockingly in San Francisco for the Dodgers and Giants. It's always low. So earlier this year, when temperatures on the East Coast were lower, San Francisco is not as big of a detriment for offense because the relative temperature was pretty good. It is no longer the case. So we are back to treating San Francisco as being a black hole for offense once again. So downgrade bats for the Giants and the Dodgers as a result of the low temperatures there. We'll dive in to the pitching preview and more in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. Our PGA DFS breakdown of the RBC Heritage is now up. We broke down a pretty good field for this week, talked about our favorite studs, roster construction, and much more. You can find that right now over on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe, and if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating as well. The NBA playoffs are here, and you can turn crossovers into cash with FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel right now and place a $5 bet, and you'll get an instant $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Just go to FanDuel and sign up to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet your first $5. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Hope is here. GamblingHelplineMA.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with the Kansas Star Casino, LLC. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WIN-IT. In Wyoming and Kansas, 1-800-522-4700 or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. Louisiana is 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. In West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Pitching preview for this Wednesday main slate, we've got Kevin Gausman at the top of the field. He comes in at $11,100. Spencer Strider's at $10,900. Clayton Kershaw at $10,000. We have Nathan Eovaldi, Alex Cobb, Brad Keller, and Hunter Green as the others at $8,000 or higher. Both Spencer Strider and Kevin Gausman are in really good matchups for today. So I think you could justify ranking either guy at the top of your list. I'm going to favor Strider by a bit, though. Personally, I want to explain that why first, then we'll go in on Gausman later on. Strider is at home facing the Reds. That matchup is not as great as Gausman's, but it's still very good. The Reds have an 89 WRC plus against righties on their current active roster since the start of last year with a 138 ISO and a 25% strikeout rate. That strikeout rate is big for upside, and Strider has plenty of that even without the help of a good opposing matchup. The 14 fastball usage for Strider is down a smidge this year, which is a trend he started to do a bit last year as well down the stretch. So if we expand the sample to the past 11 starts for Strider with fewer four-seam fastballs, he has a 2.31 skill interactive ERA with a 40% strikeout rate. Really good numbers. Now, he is still horribly inefficient with his pitches, where he's averaging 4.34 pitches per plate appearance. The average there, for context, is closer to 3.9 or so. And the Reds do actually see a lot of pitches per plate appearance too. So that's a downside. My projections know that. They still, though, have Strider down for 9.7 projected strikeouts here. That is easily tops in the slate by almost 2 full strikeouts. So there are good options, but Strider stands well above them. He can get himself into trouble, but he's worth that trouble for me. Strider has 9 strikeouts in both games so far this year, despite facing a couple lower strikeout teams. I think he could go nuts here. So Spencer Strider, despite having a lot of really good options on the slate, is still going to be my top option for today in MLB DFS. Now, between the two, Gausman does have the higher floor because he's a better real-world pitcher, I think. Maybe that's, I don't know, maybe not. But in my opinion, he's a better real-world pitcher. And the strikeouts will be there, just not as many strikeouts as Strider. Gausman, also a bit rocky so far this year. Velocity's been lower so far, almost 2 miles per hour lower. So definitely not nothing. He does still have a 28% strikeout rate with no earned runs. So clearly a decrease in his velocity hasn't hurt him too much as of yet. But in those 2 starts, the swinging strike rate for Gausman, 10.8%. It was 15.5% last year. It is important to note the teams he has faced, though, because Gausman has faced the Cardinals and the Royals both on the road. Cardinals, tremendous offense, even against righties. The Royals, about average in terms of strikeouts. The Tigers, the best matchup by far he has had this year. A 26% strikeout rate versus righties, 77 WRC plus, and a 125 ISO. So if I were judging this just by matchup, I would go Gausman. He's better in that regard. But Strider's matchup isn't bad, and I adore what he does from a strikeout perspective. So I am on Strider first. If you want to go Gausman higher, I think that's defensible. It is not my position personally, but it is defensible at least. So for me, it's Strider 1, Gausman 2, Clayton Kershaw 3. And I think those are good guys to focus on. Kershaw above all the value plays for me. None of the value plays are perfect because they're value plays for a reason. But if we're looking for a guy who can hang with the upside of Strider and Gausman at home in good matchups, and Kershaw in a high strikeout matchup too, I think the only guy who does that is Hunter Green. And we talked about the value plays yesterday where I was like, I'm not sure if I'll get to. Merrill Kelly is a value play. I will probably try to get to Hunter Green in a couple lineups here because he has a very clear path to a good ceiling. He's facing the Braves, which is a big part of why I'm not super high on him. They're a very good offense, with a 105 WRC plus and a 183 ISO. They played very well last night. No Michael Harris, obviously, but still a good offense despite that. Power is the weakness for Green, so it's tough in general, and it gets even worse in a matchup like this with the Braves. But as we saw with Andrew Heaney on Monday night, high strikeout guys with bad ball issues can have big showings, big individual games. It's more so the consistency, the long-term stuff, and Green can do that too. He has not gone longer than 4 2/3 innings yet in a game, but 13 strikeouts across 8 innings. He has walked too many guys, jacks up his pitch count, but the Braves as a team, not a super high walk team. We're up to an 11 start sample on Green with his fastball usage back up to where it was at the beginning of last year. And he has a 34% strikeout rate in that time. That strikeout rate ranks second behind Strider in each guy's most relevant sample. When you put that into a projection model, it has Green's strikeout projection at 7.91, which is actually a hair higher than Gausman tonight. So I prefer Strider and Gausman for sure because all the extra stuff counts as well. But Green has a path to a ceiling, and not every value play has that. So to me, if I'm deviating from the studs, that means I'm playing in a tournament. Playing in a tournament, I need upside. And I think that Green has the best upside among the value plays. If you use him, go into it knowing that he could get you negative points, but it's a worthwhile trade-off to me at times. Limited exposure because the upside there is very, very good. So Strider is the top guy for me, followed by Gausman, followed by Kershaw, and then I would rank Green as the one value play I'm willing to consider for tonight. We found upside with the pitchers. I think we can find upside with the stacks as well. That begins in Baltimore with the Orioles. Good weather for hitting today in Baltimore, and the Orioles facing Ken Waldichuk. And really rough start for Waldichuk so far. 14 earned runs in 8 2/3 innings. It did come in two very difficult matchups versus the Angels and the Rays, but I think we can be here once again with the Orioles. The Orioles have a 91 WRC plus against lefties since the start of last year. So it's a pretty good matchup for Waldichuk. They're definitely not the Angels. They're not the Rays. They're not hideous, but they're also not a positive, and they're probably a negative versus lefties. Waldichuk is up to 9 starts in his career. The peripherals on him are better than his results, but even some of the peripherals have some points of concern. Specifically, Waldichuk lets up a lot of fly balls. He's let up a 44% fly ball rate in this time. His 37% hard hit rate is fine, but it does mean he's living kind of on an edge, living a bit dangerously. The strikeout rate, decently low for Waldichuk at 21%, and it all leads to a 4.30 skill interactive ERA. His expected ERA is even higher than that. We did see Waldichuk get more strikeouts in AAA, which means he may tap into that skill eventually, but he's not there yet. Again, good hitting weather in Baltimore. It's the warmest on the slate, and that makes Baltimore my favorite stack of the night for today. We've also seen the Orioles against plenty of lefties recently, so we probably know what to expect. And I'm expecting to see Austin Hayes in the leadoff spot here. He moved up there 1 or 2 games ago against a lefty, and Hayes has looked really good. Another home run last night, tons of barrels so far this year, really good power numbers, lots of fly balls. So it's a small sample, and I don't want to go too crazy, but he is fun. I'm buying into what Austin Hayes is doing. Think he's a really fun option for daily fantasy for today and a focal point within the Orioles stacks. The one guy downgrade a bit, the switch hitters against the lefty, is Adley Rutschman. He does have worse power numbers against lefties, just not quite as juicy yet. So slight downgrade to Rutschman with it being a lefty out there, but do like Hayes. Santander, I think, is better than what his numbers have said so far this year, so we'll be there as well. Now, Waldichuk has struggles in tough matchups. You can say a similar thing about Eduardo Rodriguez. And Rodriguez, rough numbers, both in tough matchups. The problem with Rodriguez is that he gets another tough matchup for tonight. And I think we should stack the Jays against him. Across Rodriguez's first 2 starts, he has a 4.46 expected ERA. His actual ERA is 6.30. So there's been some bad luck in there. But for Rodriguez, a lot of fly balls, not many whiffs, with just a 7.7% swinging strike rate. He did do a decent job of keeping hard contact in check last year, and he's still doing that to an extent. But the increased fly ball rate is making that a necessity more than it was a positive last year. Positive and necessity are very different things. It is a necessity this year with all the fly balls. The velocity for Rodriguez is good this year. That it is up, so that's a positive. But guys, for whatever reason, just aren't chasing his pitches outside the zone, which puts him in bad counts, puts him in bad spots, and teams are taking advantage of that. The Jays have a 104 WRC plus against lefties on the current active roster since the start of last year. They've had some key losses, losing Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel, guys like that, but they are still at least above average in WRC plus versus lefties. I think there is enough there to make them viable on a slate where there aren't a ton of stacks I really want to get to. So the Toronto Blue Jays, to me, belong second in our stacking list behind the Baltimore Orioles. One guy within the Blue Jays here who gets a boost up in our, at least my new mentality for 2023 with my increased emphasis on speed is Whit Merrifield, because the ISO for Whit has been slipping for a long time, which meant that even against lefties last year, I was not super into Merrifield, but he did steal twice against lefties last year. He's done so once already this year. He has a 172 ISO versus lefties since the beginning of last year. So Merrifield has not been in my player pool very often recently, but I'm okay with him, and more okay with him now than I was, with speed being a bigger emphasis for me. So Whit Merrifield moving up a bit to me, and I think he does deserve at least some consideration for our rosters. Finally, for our third stack, we'll go with the Texas Rangers facing Brad Keller. And Keller's had a fascinating start to this year, where he's basically changed his entire repertoire. So he is a new pitcher, and it comes with a 2.61 ERA as well. So that part is working. Seems like he's making some good changes here. The underlying data isn't as good, though, which is why the Rangers are in play for stackings. Specifically, the underlying data I'm talking about is the expected ERA for Keller, which is 5.07. That number is high because he has let up a ton of hard contact. 52% of the balls in play against him have had an exit velo of 95 miles per hour or higher. And it does come with a lot of it on the ground, but The barrel rate against is 7.4%. That's not a big number. It's below average, but it is higher than what it was last year for Keller. And last year, he finished with a 5.09 ERA. So Keller is interesting where he might be good this year. He might have a suffocating ground ball rate, but it's too soon to tell. And with the amount of hard contact that he's let up, there is plenty of room for us to be interested in stacking against him. So I am in on the Rangers, even with Keller basically being a different guy than the one who struggled last year. One thing to note is that both last year and early this year, Keller has struggled more with righties than with lefties, reverse platoon splits here. So that's not ideal for some of the guys here in the stack, but Corey Seager's banged up. So if he doesn't play, it's not as big of a downside in this situation. Does help Marcus Semien and Adolis Garcia. Both those guys are willing to run too. Josh Young gets a boost up because of Keller's low strikeout ways. He struggled with strikeouts, and he's another guy who might be willing to try to swipe a bag. So I'd favor the righties here. If Seager does not play, it's not a massive downgrade for me with regards to Ranger stacks. So I think they're a good option here. I would rank them pretty decently below both the Orioles and the Blue Jays, but the Rangers to me are our number 3 stack of the night. Let's dive into things to watch. Talk about Taj Bradley making his debut for the Rays, which could make the Red Sox viable for stacking here, but I don't expect Bradley to go deep in this game. Looking at his first 2 starts in AAA, he went 51 and 55 pitches across those 2 games. And you look at the bullpen behind Bradley, they are very, very good. So that does limit the appeal in Boston a bit. I'm still fine with them, but they are far from a priority. So I think I'm probably just going to be pretty neutral on this, where I'm not super high on the Red Sox. Will not use Bradley because I expect the pitch count to be super low, but I think it is worth noting there. One other team that's facing a guy who has struggled with some hard contact is the Royals. Royals facing Nathan Eovaldi. He does have better velocity this year than what he had last year. But if you look back to last year, in the starts where he's had more cutters, he's had more cutters this year as well. In that time, 7-start sample, 46% hard hit rate allowed with a 37% fly ball rate. So the contact profile there for Eovaldi is not really what you want it to be. I'm not super into the Royals. 84 WRC plus against righties, pretty low power numbers. But if there are individuals you like on that team, I do think they are at least in play for today based on Eovaldi's issues that he's had with hard contact recently. Finally, I did want to talk Chris Sale super briefly. Facing the Rays today, I think that's enough where we can be pretty out on him in terms of DFS. But you know, last time out, did get a decent number of strikeouts in his 2 starts now, a 3.83 skill interactive ERA, 31% strikeout rate, a lot of walks. So I could see considering the Rays here, but personally, I think we saw enough from Sale in that one where a bit lower on it. The Rays do crush lefties, 130 WRC plus against lefties, but I think personally it's a stay away from me. So the Rays offense, scorching hot to start this year, very good against lefties. Sale's surface numbers, not ideal, but I think there's enough there where I will probably treat that one pretty neutral. So both the Rays and the Red Sox, to me, considerations for stacks, but not super high within that list. Let's finish up here with some home run calls for today. The boring one, I talked about Eduardo Rodriguez letting up more fly balls. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is crushing so far this year. 14% barrel rate. His expected WOBA is 496. His actual WOBA is 447, so also very high. 5.7% strikeout rate. 58% hard hit rate. He's bananas. In his fly ball rate is also the highest it's been in his career as well. So I know it's been a good start for Vlad, but I feel like the home runs are going to start coming. And when they do, they might come in bunches. So maybe a double dong call for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. for tonight. I think it's at least on the table. So Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the boring home run call for today. The fun one, he wasn't a fun one last year because he had 33 home runs, but Anthony Santander has struggled so far this year, has historically been very good against lefties. He's a switch hitter. The hard contact and the barrel number is not bad. So I think that he's going to get back on track here pretty soon. So home run calls for today, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Anthony Santander, and I will say Austin Hayes' home run prop numbers, not too bad either if you want to go with an Oriole who has hit the ball well so far this year. That is all that we got here for today on the solo shot, but we'll be back with you once again tomorrow to break down the FanDuel main slates. So make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And again, our PGA podcast is now up over on the numberFire DFS feed. If you've got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your MLB DFS lineups. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to break down Thursday's slate. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.